One thing I want to ask as a markets reporter, because we've been trying to discern if there's some kind of market reaction to the likelihood of either a Clinton or Trump presidency. And it's very hard to figure out at this point in terms of how the market reacts on certain wins or polls or whatever it may be. Should investors be concerned? How should people that are, trading and making money in markets be thinking about a potential Trump presidency?
Well, we don't know what he would do, and that's the problem. There's no reason to believe that what he would do would stay within the bounds of anybody's notion of responsibility. So, I wouldn't even think about it as an investor. Never mind, one nuclear war can spoil your whole day. I would be really worried about Trump in the White House and never mind my investments. How about my life?
Hello everyone, welcome back to another episode of the Let's Talk Headlines series. I'm your host Jay, and this is The Objective. I want to thank you so much for tuning in to the 48th episode of the Let's Talk Headlines series. For those of you who are visiting, I want to wish you a warm welcome, and I want to welcome you to come back more and more. And you can do that by subscribing to my channel and liking my videos. And also for those of you who continue to show your support, I want to thank you for that continued support. The date is April the 9th, 2018, and I have a quote of the day for you, and it's a good one today. But before we even get into that, I want to remind you to take a look at www.politicalstorm.com. Politicalstorm.com is a website where its contributors, and I'm fortunate to be one, we are dedicated to bringing back discussion to politics. You have a myriad of different schools of thought and ideas coming to one place where you're able to interact with one another, comment, just sharpen your convictions, challenge your convictions. It's a great website, and it's completely nonpartisan. So it gives an equal platform to every one of its contributors. I highly respect the idea of it, and that's why I'm proud to be a contributor. So be sure to check out www.politicalstorm.com. In the last episode, episode 47, I believe it was, we discussed some of the recent police shootings in the United States of America that have caused uproar. There have been protests, there have been riots, there have been outcry from members of the Black Lives Matter community who believe that, especially in the case of Alton Sterling, like we brought up last week, they feel that justice isn't being exercised because the officer involved in the shooting, they're receiving no charges at all. And if you haven't seen the episode, definitely check my 47th episode. I go into a little bit of detail as to why there may have not been any charges. And one of the things we have to remember, and it's going to tie into the episode today, is that we have to take each of these instances, these shooting instances, on a case-by-case basis, because the circumstances around these situations and these shooting scenarios, they're very dynamic. And there's so many different entities and so many different cogs, moving parts when it comes to a police shooting. You have like different police officers, different experiences, perhaps different training. And when you think of the subject, when you think of the subject of the shooting, or I should say the victim of the shooting, that's a whole other can of worms that brings a new dynamic to each and every situation. So there was a recent shooting in New York City that caused similar uproar. The shooting of a man by the name of Saheed Vassell. I hope I said his name right. Now, in this shooting, the news came out that an unarmed black man was shot, and that obviously caused a Twitter storm of tweets. Just shedding light on police brutality and how these cops are trigger happy. And, that was the image that was put forth. When the shooting happened and you hear black man dead, unarmed, people just get those Twitter fingers going. But upon further investigation and by waiting for the actual news to come out, you get more context. And even before more news came out, there was a video that came out that actually showed the subject before he was killed by police. Now, yes, he was unarmed, okay, but what he had in his hand did resemble a firearm. There's a video. You could actually see it's all over YouTube. It's on CNN as well and different news sites. This male, he was actually holding a shower head, and it looked like a firearm. He was going up towards people and he was pointing it at their heads. There's a woman and her child walking down the road or down the sidewalk, and he goes up to them and points this shower head at them. And it does look like a gun. And you can actually be the judge of it yourself by checking out the video on YouTube. So there were 3 police calls that were put in, and this guy approached police, and he actually, to my understanding, brandished this shower head looking like a gun, and he was shot and he was killed. Now we talked last week about the shooting in Sacramento of Stephano Clarke. Forgive me if I mispronounced that. And the police officers, there is not CCTV, but there is police video from their body cams. And the officers stated the reason why they shot was because he had outstretched his arm with a cell phone. This goes to show, this instance right here goes to show that this does happen. No one can say for sure, and I'm not willing to put my life on the line to say that's what happened in Sacramento. But I want you to understand that these situations are so dynamic and there are so many different entities at work, and pretty much anything could happen. So this kind of just shows us that, as tragic as it is that this male was killed, and I'm sure he suffered from some sort of mental illness, which is a whole other debate and discussion. It just goes to show that mental illness is a real thing, and that there are people who want suicide by cop. There are people who pretend to have firearms, and they use replica firearms. They use things that look like firearms to achieve a goal, whether that's suicide by cop or whether it's just mental illness or just wanting to terrorize other people. So it's just something that we want to keep in our mind. And that's why I think that body cams are so important. That's why I think that CCTV and showing the public, as much as you can about these shootings is so important. It's so important so that people can say, you know what, because in the court of law, it all boils down to, would a reasonable person fear for their safety? Would a reasonable person think that they are in jeopardy? That's what it boils down to. Moving along here, folks, President Trump, trade wars. So a lot of people, when President Trump got into office, believed that he would, start a nuclear war. That doesn't seem to be the case here. It appears that President Trump is starting a trade war. Now, traditionally, conservatives, they subscribe to free trade, right? Low restrictions, low regulations, allow trade, supply and demand to do its thing. And that's the best way to go. President Trump stepped away from this and actually is trying out, I should say, or implementing anathema to free trade, which is, some would say, protectionism. Now, there are tariffs on steel, aluminum, and the sort. And you have to understand the president's reasoning as to why he would want to implement these tariffs. It all boils down to his slogan, making America great again, make America great again. If anything can be said about the president, it's that he is focused on his goal. He is focused on his agenda to make America great again, to put America first. Now, there are different opinions as to, whether there's a huge trade deficit between America and China, if China is actually getting away with unfair trade practices for years. There are debates, and there are different people who say different things, depending on where you stand. But tariffs, they are a tool. Now, free trade is great, but tariffs, it is a tool that can be used. Now, there are pros and cons, and I actually linked, in the description here, I'm going to link an article to a BBC News article that outlined it pretty well. Now, a lot of people are saying that when, if Trump imposes these tariffs on steel, then China and maybe other countries such as Canada or Russia, they may counterimpose tariffs on other products. And that's what you have that's when you have a trade war. It's kind of like a tit for tat sort of deal. And that really helps no one. So obviously there are cons, and it is a risky move. There's no doubt about that. It's not very conservative of President Trump, if you will. But it can be argued that when you're in an extreme situation, when extreme situations call for extreme measures. And tariffs, I don't know if it's an extreme thing. Some people say that it's equivalent to a nuclear war. I think that's a little bit over the top. But, the president believes that China has been getting away with unfair trade practices for decades. And the president is a businessman. And at the end of the day, he has to wear this hat. Whether there is a trade war that, puts America in a horrible economic situation, he'll have to take responsibility for that. But I just hope that the media and those who may be against the president, generally speaking, if this does turn out to be an economically wise and knowledgeable plan, that they are willing and they're able to give credit to the president. So this is something that we want to stay on top of, to see how the economy reacts to these tariffs, how other countries react to these tariffs, because there's already been word from China that they are willing to, they're willing to go the distance essentially when it comes to this trade war, and they will go tit for tat. So that isn't good, but obviously we want to stay on top of this, and I'll be looking out for news headlines in regards to this to keep you folks updated. Finally, in Syria, there was an alleged chemical attack, and countries on the world stage, they are accusing Syria of these attacks. Now, Assad, he denies and declines. Russia says that they are, fake attacks just to gain sympathy from the West and from the international stage, I guess, if that makes any sense. But at the end of the day, the president has denounced these attacks, of course, and we know that April 2017 of last year, when there were attacks from the Syrians, President Trump launched a counterattack, used Tomahawk missiles to, attack the air bases in Syria. So we're seeing that the president isn't afraid to use military force, as opposed to his predecessor, former President Barack Obama, who made that line in the sand. He said, this is a red line. Using chemical weapons is a red line. We will not tolerate it. And when Syria did use chemical weapons, what did he do? He did nothing. So you see that there is a dichotomy between the current president and the former president in terms of their willingness to use military responses, in regards to these attacks. So we're waiting to see what the president is going to do, but we know based on previous behavior, he is not afraid to respond militarily to attacks. So it's a horrible way, I can imagine, to be subject to a chemical attack. Apparently there was video of individuals in stairwells and buildings with foam coming out of their mouth and nose and who knows where else. But it's a terrible thing. And obviously this, everyone is looking at the president and what he's going to do, knowing that Syria and Moscow are buddy-buddy. So there's huge scrutiny, and people are definitely critically, with a critical eye, looking at what the president is going to do. With that, folks, I think I've talked your ear off today. We're going to conclude today's show. I want to thank you so much for tuning in to the Objective Podcast. Make it your goal to be objective. Have a good night.